Lincoln Mitchell joins us live via Skype. He's adjunct professor of political science at Columbia University. He's also a political analyst and writer. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So obviously an incredible day as we're watching some of these scenes. What does the size and scope of these protests really say about the political climate in the U.S.?
Well, the size is not overwhelming. I mean, 5,000 or 10,000 people. We get demonstrations in the United States with, 50,000, 100,000. But the nature of this, that these people stormed the Capitol, broke in, sat in the chairs, went through the offices of, members of Congress. This tells you that there is a minority in this country that is willing to use violent and illegal means when they can't accomplish what they want at the voting booth. And that is very troubling.
And we have seen these pro-Trump protesters calling themselves patriots, but by other people they've been called insurrectionists, terrorists, and President-elect Biden even called them extremists. How important is it to classify what this group of protesters is doing in terms of damage to the democracy?
They're doing a great deal of damage to democracy, and the label we put on them doesn't change that. I mean, these people, and if you look at the signs and the way they carry themselves and their slogans, they are in a fantasy world in a similar way that Donald Trump is in a fantasy world. They believe that this is, 1776 and they are overthrowing some kind of tyranny in the United States. But that's the product of feverish and fantasy minds fed by bizarre social media and bizarre stations like OAN and Newsmax, and not least Donald Trump himself. But they represent a real destabilizing element in our democracy. What we saw today is the culmination of 4 years of Democratic rollback under Donald Trump, and a few months since he lost the election, where he has made it clear that he will do anything, tell any lie to try to stay in office. And the reason that's destabilizing is that it's almost for certain he will leave office on January 20th, and Joe Biden will become president. But if a third of the country believes Joe Biden stole the election and isn't the legitimate president, and if a small fraction of those people are willing to do things like this violently, because they believe that, then the country will not be stable going forward.
And we have seen international reaction also coming in, calling for the peaceful transition of power that has always been a tenet of U.S. democracy. How is this being viewed by other world leaders, and how does it compare with sort of similar insurrections that have happened in other parts of the world?
Well, this notion, and for Americans are told, I mean, this is an international audience, but we as Americans learn at a young age, not only that we have this peaceful transition, but we're the only country that has a peaceful transition, which has not been true, really ever, but we're told that. So our failure to do that is very damaging for the United States standing in the rest of the world, because, look, in the rest of the world, particularly our allies, are very happy to see Joe Biden coming into the White House. He's an ally of theirs, he's a known commodity. But it shows if it can happen once in the United States, it can happen twice in the United States. This is similar to some events we've seen in other countries, but what's striking here is that the president, who is on his way out after losing an election, is mobilizing people to kind of violently support him in the absence of any major demonstrations from his opponents, right? What we didn't see today in Washington or New York or LA or anywhere was anti-Trump demonstrators on the street, because the anti-Trump people in the United States, and that's the majority to be clear, they went, they voted, they watched the votes being counted, and now they're just assuming that the constitutional and legal process will take its course. And what's unusual about the United States even now is that with all that happened today, and don't forget that this happened on the day that the House and the Senate were having these kind of debates, if you will, about whether to accept the Electoral College. No, those weren't real debates. We know that they're going to accept it.
Right.
But it was happening on this very important day.
And of course, all this also happening in the middle of a pandemic that's already killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. What does this mean for the work that the new Congress was doing on things like stimulus, COVID funding, and their other priorities?
Well, when you say this happened in the midst of a pandemic, yesterday, 3,600 Americans died of COVID-19. That number is going to be about the same today. What that means is that the new president and the new Congress, which is now in office, they have a massive policy problem, right? They have to solve this problem. They have to get the vaccinations out the door. They have to get Americans to behave better with regards to social distancing and mask wearing. And they have to start the American economy. The good news is, with a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate, Biden will be able to get his cabinet into office, which is very important, and he will be able to pass some laws. He's not going to pass any radical reforms, because while he has a Democratic majority, there are some conservative Democrats, people like Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, who will generally support the president, but not too far to the left. But we're going to see legislation getting through that will help Americans, as Joe Biden promised during his campaign. And that's the difference between having this discussion today and having this discussion a week ago when we didn't know what was going to happen in Georgia.